Millions of undeclared foreign banknotes were discovered, stuffed beneath sofa cushions inside the private ranch of South Africa's head of state. A few miles away, destitute mothers give birth upon freezing clinic floors, cradling newborns in cardboard boxes because public wards have run dry of basic medicine and empty beds. Across the political heartland of KwaZulu-Natal, red banners rise to confront an entrenched regime, shattering 3 decades of post-apartheid compromise and demanding economic sovereignty in our lifetime. If power changes hands, but not structure, has anything really changed? Stay with us as South African dynamics pulls back the veil on a defining geopolitical crossroads. If this confrontation speaks to your unyielding demand for truth and dignity, show your support right now with a like. Leave your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to ensure these vital stories are never silenced. What unfolded on the 22nd of August was not merely another campaign rally in Mzunduzi. It was an ideological earthquake that laid bare the profound betrayal felt across South Africa. For millions who endured racial oppression, the promise of freedom has stalled at the ballot box, leaving the foundational levers of wealth mining rights and ancestral land firmly locked away from the indigenous majority. The spectacle of state power in South Africa has entered a territory of profound moral exhaustion. In February 2020, foreign currency totaling hundreds of thousands of United States dollars derived from private game transactions was concealed inside household furnishings, stuffed directly into sofa cushions and mattresses at the private Phala Phala wildlife estate of President Cyril Ramaphosa. When the scandal ruptured into public consciousness through formal disclosures by former intelligence officials, it revealed a staggering dissonance at the apex of government. Julius Malema, addressing thousands of disciplined economic freedom fighters cadres gathered across the province of KwaZulu-Natal, seized upon this surreal reality to draw a searing political indictment. In the tradition of infamous illicit empires where cash was buried underground and hidden within residential walls, because conventional financial repositories could no longer accommodate the sheer volume of accumulated paper, the image of a sitting head of state stashing untracked foreign currency beneath furniture became an indelible symbol of elite accumulation. Placing millions inside a living room couch is not a casual oversight. It signals a ruling establishment where private affluence operates entirely detached from the formal scrutiny demanded by the Constitution. Yet the true gravity of this crisis does not reside merely in the physical existence of hidden banknotes. It is defined by the catastrophic human cost unfolding simultaneously across the public sector. While elite corridors overflow with concealed wealth, the foundational institutions that sustain ordinary South African families are decaying in plain sight. In township clinics and rural provincial hospitals from the Eastern Cape to KwaZulu-Natal, the collapse of basic public healthcare has reached harrowing proportions. Underfunded state medical facilities frequently run out of essential antibiotics, sterile consumables, and functional hospital beds. Pregnant women are compelled to endure labor on bare concrete floors, and newborn babies are laid to rest in cardboard boxes because neonatal incubators and cribs are non-existent. This degradation of human life is not the result of unavoidable fiscal scarcity. It is the direct consequence of systemic neglect and entrenched patronage networks that have diverted public revenues away from community survival and into private hands. Behind this systemic failure lies a deeper institutional paralysis, the intentional fragmentation of state administration. The public healthcare network operates not as a coherent sovereign entity, but as disconnected silos governed by bureaucratic inertia. When a vulnerable patient presents at a municipal clinic with documented medical allergies and chronic conditions, that vital clinical history remains trapped within an isolated paper register. If that same citizen collapses at a tertiary hospital in another district, medical personnel have no digital access to their medical profile. Prescribing medication becomes a lethal game of chance simply because state computer systems do not communicate with one another. This absence of digital integration is not a technological limitation. It is an administrative choice. A modern unified digital register creates transparency, eliminates fraudulent billing, and renders corrupt procurement chains obsolete. Where there is no tender to inflate and no middleman to reward the political leadership, shows no appetite for modernization. This bureaucratic negligence functions as an invisible chain, binding millions of working-class citizens to an administrative apparatus that treats poverty as an individual humiliation rather than a structural failure. The state demands endless affidavits from police stations to prove that a deceased parent has passed, ignoring the very death certificates issued by its own Department of Home Affairs. Citizens are forced to parade their misery before indifferent municipal clerks, begging for survival while the state hoards its resources. Julius Malema laid bare this profound institutional betrayal, demanding an immediate end to a system where corporate profits and political tenders supersede the fundamental right to life. Yet the decay of public healthcare and the scandal of hoarded millions represent only the surface of this crisis. A far more insidious deception has taken root within the government's flagship social policies, where the promise of shelter has been transformed into a permanent mechanism of political containment. For 3 decades, the central pillar of post-apartheid social policy has been the Reconstruction and Development Program, a vast state initiative that erected millions of identical uniform cinder block houses across the periphery of South Africa's major metropolitan centers. Yet within the analytical framework presented to the Assembly in KwaZulu-Natal, these state-subsidized settlements do not represent genuine progress or social mobility. They represent a calculated architecture of dependency. Julius Malema articulated a profound structural critique that resonates deeply across the working-class townships. An identical government house is not freedom, but a permanent instrument of political pacification. When the state provides a cramped uniform dwelling, while denying industrial employment, it effectively locks the working class into perpetual gratitude. A citizen stripped of economic agency is repeatedly reminded by local ward councillors that shelter was gifted by the ruling party, transforming a fundamental human necessity into political leverage. True dignity does not demand an administrative handout, it demands meaningful employment. A worker earning a living wage does not require a uniform government dwelling because an economically sovereign individual possesses the means to build a home in their own chosen image. This contradiction between superficial welfare and systemic exclusion becomes painfully evident within the national energy matrix. Over 28 million South Africans currently depend on monthly grants disbursed by the South African Social Security Agency, officially acknowledging that nearly half the population lives below the poverty line. Yet the state-owned power utility Eskom operates under a commercial mandate that has seen municipal electricity tariffs surge by more than 600% over the past 15 years. The state presents a glaring institutional paradox. By day, an indigent mother is officially recognized as destitute to qualify for a modest social grant. By night, that same state classifies her as affluent enough to pay predatory commercial rates for basic domestic power. The tragic reality inside millions of township households is defined by wall sockets and copper cables that deliver no warmth or light. A physical switch is flicked on, but the room remains dark because the family cannot afford prepaid electricity vouchers. Eskom's pursuit of commercial profitability at the expense of basic human rights mirrors the economic exclusion of the past, substituting explicit racial segregation with financial disenfranchisement. This administrative cruelty reaches its apex within the tertiary education sector, where the historic student debt crisis has escalated beyond 16 billion rand. Generations of young South Africans who navigated no-fee township schools under the promise that education would serve as their pathway out of poverty encounter an insurmountable financial wall upon reaching universities and technical vocational colleges. After excelling through rigorous academic programs, hundreds of thousands of working-class graduates are systematically denied their degree certificates and diplomas because their impoverished families cannot settle outstanding tuition fees. The bureaucratic logic is self-defeating and punitive. The state withholds the very qualification required to secure formal employment, thereby ensuring that the graduate remains perpetually unable to earn the income needed to clear the debt. Julius Malema and the economic freedom fighters spearheaded the parliamentary offensive, demanding the unconditional and immediate release of all withheld academic records, dismantling the institutional barriers that criminalize youth poverty. This struggle inside the legislative chambers is not a debate over minor administrative adjustments. This is not reform. This is not rhetoric. This is accountability. The movement insists that the children of social grant recipients who were educated in free public schools must transition automatically into tertiary institutions without the extortion of upfront registration fees. Denying a qualified graduate their physical certificate is an assault on generational mobility and a betrayal of the collective sacrifice made by working-class families. Yet as the clamor for educational justice and municipal accountability reverberates through the streets of KwaZulu-Natal, it exposes an even more foundational reality that governance alone cannot resolve. For even if every diploma is released and every utility fee is subsidized, the structural question of national survival remains unanswered as long as the very ground beneath the nation's feet remains alienated from its rightful heirs. Beyond the collapse of public utilities and the crisis of municipal governance lies the unresolved core of South Africa's unfinished revolution, the fundamental question of the land. For 3 decades, political discourse has treated racial inequality as a cultural friction rather than a structural robbery. Yet within the ideological architecture of the economic freedom fighters, property ownership is identified as the indispensable origin of all human dignity. Disrespect towards the indigenous majority does not stem from race in the abstract. It stems directly from total material dispossession. Land is not merely soil. It is the source of food, the foundation of industrial labor, the platform for shelter, and the legal key that unlocks the trillions of dollars in platinum gold and manganese resting beneath the surface. When colonizing forces landed on these shores, their initial objective was not the control of cultural customs, but the systematic seizure of the land, knowing full well that whoever controls the territory inevitably controls every mineral and economic opportunity that follows. This historic injustice has carved a profound psychological divide into daily civic life. Across commercial districts and suburban centers, the material legacy of land dispossession shapes how citizens move through public spaces. An individual who owns property moves with inherent confidence, conscious that the ground beneath their feet represents generational security. Conversely, a dispossessed citizen walks with perpetual apprehension, conditioned by historical trauma to navigate commercial spaces as an assumed suspect, fearful of arbitrary searches and structural humiliation. More than 70% of private commercial agricultural land remains concentrated within the hands of a privileged minority, leaving millions of indigenous families crowded into impoverished settlements without title deeds or productive acreage. In this historic Julius Malema speech delivered across the political heartland of KwaZulu-Natal, the leader of the Red Berets confronted this historical wound, directly situating the struggle for Malema land reform at the very center of contemporary EFF South Africa politics. He declared that the historical compromise which preserved colonial property relations has created an acute South Africa political crisis that no conventional ballot can soothe. For generations, corporate conglomerates and entrenched elites sat comfortably at the table, consuming the mineral wealth of the nation in isolation, while the indigenous working class was relegated to watching from the periphery. That era of passive observation has reached its definitive conclusion. The table belongs to the sovereign people, and the mineral abundance of the soil must be shared equitably among those whose ancestral labor built the nation. This historic confrontation represents the ultimate clash between economic chains versus freedom, dismantling the structures that have kept the African majority financially subjugated. Pause for a moment with us. Take a second right here in the comments to share where you are watching this broadcast from, your city, your country, or your corner of the African diaspora. South African Dynamics extends our deepest gratitude to every single viewer standing with us, sending our heartfelt blessings for resilience, strength, and unwavering dignity on your journey. Let our comment section stand as a global map of solidarity. The demand for land restitution in KwaZulu-Natal is fundamentally intertwined with basic human development, the establishment of paved roads, clean domestic sanitation, and reliable running water in every village, so that no human being is ever compelled to share drinking water with livestock. It is an unyielding insistence that the children of the poor must enjoy identical educational and economic opportunities to those historically reserved for the privileged. Yet reclaiming the land and demanding sovereign control over natural wealth represents only one dimension of this struggle. A far more elusive and entrenched barrier stands in the path of black empowerment, a private banking monopoly that continues to dictate who is permitted to build wealth and who remains permanently excluded. The financial barricades erected against the working class within the domestic sphere reflect a broader architecture of international economic control. For decades, commercial financial institutions across South Africa have systematically classified indigenous entrepreneurs and working-class families as high-risk borrowers, restricting access to affordable capital, commercial mortgages, and developmental credit. This structural exclusion has prompted the economic freedom fighters to demand the immediate establishment of a sovereign state-owned bank, a dedicated financial vehicle designed to dismantle the private banking cartel and deliver low-interest credit to the dispossessed. While private commercial lenders operate with unrestricted autonomy, extracting billions in consumer interest across southern Africa. The proposal for a publicly managed state bank is routinely dismissed by mainstream economists and corporate lobbies as unfeasible. This institutional double standard is impossible to defend if the state is fully capable of establishing public hospitals alongside private healthcare facilities and maintaining public schools alongside private academies. There is no rational justification for preventing the creation of a public banking institution to serve the unbanked majority. This battle over sovereign financial autonomy reverberates directly onto the geopolitical stage, drawing intense scrutiny from international capital markets, Western diplomatic missions, and multinational mining conglomerates headquartered across Europe and North America. Global institutions and diplomatic observers in Washington have monitored the growing influence of the Red Berets with profound apprehension. Precisely because the demand for the nationalization of strategic mining sectors and the redistribution of agricultural land directly confronts foreign extractive monopolies that have profited from African mineral wealth for over a century. The profound hypocrisy exposed by the Phala Phala scandal resonated far beyond South African borders, demonstrating to international observers that while the domestic ruling elite accumulated and concealed foreign currency within private furniture, the foundational economic sovereignty of the nation was being subordinated to appease external markets. Julius Malema has consistently rejected external intimidation from Western diplomatic corridors and foreign observers, asserting that genuine national autonomy cannot exist whilst the mineral endowment of the continent is shipped abroad for foreign enrichment. He articulated an unyielding geopolitical stance. The wealth extracted from the platinum, diamond, and gold corridors of South Africa must first and foremost uplift the indigenous African people who extract it from the depths of the earth. Respect in international affairs is not won through diplomatic subservience, but through the uncompromising defense of national resources and constitutional independence. Yet as geopolitical pressures mount and international financial interests attempt to contain the momentum of economic emancipation, the movement draws its deepest strength not from external corridors of diplomacy, but from an immortal legacy of African liberation that no foreign power can extinguish. The true durability of any revolutionary project is measured not by the transient popularity of a single electoral cycle, but by the resilience of the ideological lineage it carries forward. Addressing the generational divide across KwaZulu-Natal, Julius Malema invoked the enduring memory of the continent's most formidable liberation figures, Steve Biko, Chris Hani, and Robert Sobukwe. The historical record demonstrates that while oppressive power structures have repeatedly eliminated the physical lives of revolutionary thinkers, they have proven entirely powerless against the ideas those leaders unleashed into the public consciousness. Black consciousness, agrarian justice, and the uncompromising demand for self-determination cannot be extinguished by administrative intimidation or political persecution. The philosophy of economic emancipation is an immortal inheritance. Once embedded within the collective consciousness of a dispossessed people, it becomes an unstoppable historical force. To safeguard this generational transition, the economic freedom fighters have methodically established a robust institutional foundation through the Youth Command mobilizing student bodies and young workers across academic institutions such as the University of Zululand and the University of KwaZulu-Natal. The strategic imperative is unequivocal. The survival of the movement requires constructing a second and third tier of uncompromising leadership, capable of taking up the historical spear when the founding generation departs. True political longevity demands institutional continuity rather than individual charisma. The struggle for national liberation cannot depend upon vague political commitments. This is not promises. This is not speeches. This is policy. The movement insists that systematic training in constitutional governance, municipal administration, and ground-level mobilization must transform spontaneous anger into disciplined, structured power. This disciplined organization faces its most decisive frontline in the complex political landscape of KwaZulu-Natal, where the movement directly challenges entrenched political establishments and historical rivalries. Navigating the fierce contest against traditional political structures, the party refuses to concede any geographical territory as an inaccessible redoubt. Activists and ground forces are summoned to conduct door-to-door engagements across every township street factory floor, and rural ward defending every single vote with unyielding vigilance. This represents a profound confrontation between historical justice and established power, where ordinary citizens resolve to claim their place at the national table rather than remain passive subjects of elite bargaining. The red flag raised in Mzunduzi is an assertion that the quest for self-determination will not be broken by fear. Yet, as this generational vanguard steps forward to claim the mantle of historical leadership, South Africa stands poised on the precipice of a definitive political transformation. The critical question remains whether the unyielding momentum forged in the streets of KwaZulu-Natal can finally dismantle 3 decades of economic compromise, or whether the entrenched barriers of the old order will once again attempt to silence the nation's demand for total liberation. Before we close, let us pause together. What you have just witnessed is not merely a commentary on a passing political headline, but a profound testament to the enduring quest for sovereignty, human dignity, and generational justice across the African diaspora. If this investigation into the shifting geopolitical landscape of South Africa has spoken to your conscience, subscribe to South African Dynamics now. We are dedicated to building a space where the unfiltered realities of African self-determination are analyzed with depth and uncompromising integrity. By subscribing, you choose to walk alongside us into every pivotal chapter of this continent's unfolding history. The enduring reverberations of this Julius Malema speech reach far beyond the municipal boundaries of KwaZulu-Natal. They mark a definitive and irreversible rupture with 3 decades of political compromise, proving that the systemic crises illuminated by the Phala Phala scandal cannot be placated by administrative charity or superficial housing schemes. As the national conversation surrounding Malema land reform gathers unstoppable momentum across every province, the foundational paradox of the post-apartheid democratic project stands exposed before the international community. If wealth grows but inequality deepens, who is development really? For ultimately, this historic Julius Malema speech establishes an undeniable truth for the modern world: the ballot without the land is an empty vessel, and political independence without economic sovereignty remains fundamentally incomplete. The restoration of ancestral property, the public stewardship of vast mineral reserves, and the dismantling of predatory financial monopolies represent the only viable path towards generational healing. The struggle for economic freedom in our lifetime is no longer a distant vision. It is the defining moral and political imperative that will reshape South Africa and inspire the wider world. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Share this broadcast with those who value truth and remain steadfast in the collective march towards justice and dignity.